All right, so in this unit, we're talking about voting, we're talking about elections, and in this section of notes, we're talking about U.S. elections. So first, how do you become president of the United States? Now we're not gonna watch the video because we'll do that when we actually get into Google Meets. So I will show that later. But what you need to know: how do you become president? This has nothing to do with the actual office itself. We've already gone over that. We've talked about the qualifications to become president. This is actually how do you financially support yourself to run or campaign to become president of the United States. So, first of all, for a candidate who wants to run for president, they must campaign for well over a year. A lot of people who run for president campaign for close to 2 years even. You also must be able to raise money because elections are expensive and campaigning is expensive. So candidates must raise millions, even billions of dollars. You also, as a candidate, you must be able to participate in debates. That is very important. And if you remember earlier in the year, there were the Democrat primaries where we had different people who were running for the Democratic ticket. They actually campaigned and they participated in debates between each other, and they were televised. So if you actually watched that, which was I think last year, you should have gotten an understanding of who these people were that you were trying to cast your ballot for if you thought about voting Democrat. Another thing is that you must be able to travel around the country because you don't just stay at home while you're running to become president. You need to be able to go out and meet the people because you have to make sure that the people are going to vote for you. So that means that you have to fly around the country to different locations and you actually have to make speaking engagements and speak to people in order for you to get their vote. They have to be able to have trust in you. You also need to advertise, so you might have different commercials. I'll show you some different commercials or different advertisements that people or presidents have used in the past as part of their campaign. And you must also be able to navigate the media. And this is very important because the media is ruthless, okay? And they are trying to find every little thing about you that might be wrong or that they might can question. Now, in the 2020 election, I will say that they are being a little more lenient on certain people than they are others, but we'll talk about that later. So, big picture, the election process. So this is just going to go through the step-by-step process to actually get your name on the ballot. Okay, so we're talking about once you announce to if you end up on the ballot, because Democrats, Republicans, any political party, they only can pick one person to represent them on the ballot each year. Okay, so what you'll see is that number 1 says potential candidates must announce their intent to run. Candidates mean more than one person. The Democrats, let me minimize. The Democrats actually in their recent election, this 2020 election, in this 2020 election, they actually had 7 people who had announced that they were going to run for president on the Democratic ticket. Only one person was selected. We know that's Joe Biden. However, you also have Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Michael Bloomberg, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Tulsi Gabbard. Okay, and so these people slowly they announced their candidacy, that they wanted to run for president. They participated in debates. They flew around the country. They raised money. They campaigned. And then towards the very end, Joe Biden was selected to be the representative for the Democratic Party, and his name would actually officially go on the ballot. So let me go back. Okay. Next, it says candidates must participate in initial debate/campaigning. We saw that. It says primary elections and caucuses then determine one final candidate for each party. We also saw that. We said that that was Joe Biden. Party choices are made official at national conventions. Okay, so after party choices are made official at national conventions, candidates then continue on, the final 2, okay? Candidates then continue on and they launch campaigns, they travel, they also participate in even more debates. And then finally, the general election occurs in November. The Electoral College votes in December. All in all, the election process can last nearly 2 years. One of the things that I wanted to point out is that this is just for the opposing party. Typically, I want to say historically this is true, typically the incumbent, which is the person who is currently sitting president, if they are on their second term in office, then they're going to have to find somebody to replace them in that political party. For example, when Barack Obama finished his second term, then the Democrats could pick a new candidate. And then also you had the Republicans who had a candidate. Now, in this situation that we're going into with 2020, you've got Donald Trump, who is the incumbent, and he is going on his second term in office potentially, and the Republicans have chosen him to represent them. So that's what I mean by historically. If you're trying to run for re-election, your political party is going to choose you to represent them. If you are coming out new and they are trying to replace someone who has typically been in office, then you're going to have to find somebody else. So this is the election timeline. This is the example of the 2020 election. So spring 2019, they began to announce their candidacy to run for president. It continues through the fall. Initial party debates and primaries/caucuses begin. This is when I was teaching my class last year, and we actually got to talk about the debates between the Democratic candidates because it was televised. So we have the caucuses. Again, these are just primaries where they're trying to slowly pick off people where different places around the countries are being polled. If the polling does not go well and you're not getting enough votes, which, surprisingly, like Kamala Harris, she did not get a lot of votes in certain places. And that's when she had decided to actually say that she had quit running for president because her campaign was not doing well. Same thing. So you'll start to see people slowly, quit, if the other word, they'll slowly quit. So you go all the way, Republican and Democrat national conventions. We have not had that just yet because of COVID. Presidential and vice presidential debates, which that's coming up soon. Campaigning, speaking engagements, advertising, etc. You're going to see a little bit more of that. And then finally in November, you're going to see the actual election take place. You also will see the Electoral College ballots that are going to be cast on television, but officially they do not have to be cast until December. Okay, but we'll discuss all of that, and you should have seen that in the last section of notes for the Electoral College. January 2021 is when the new president will be inaugurated, which means that they will officially accept the new requirements and that they're going to officially accept the presidency. So that's when you see them stand in front of Capitol building and they place their hand on the Bible and it's this big thing, okay? And we'll show more pictures of that. So, a lot of information here, I'm sorry. What factors determine who gets nominated? These are typical things that are very important if you were trying to get nominated for the ballot, okay, or on the ballot by your party. The first thing is that you want to make sure that you have a good reputation and that you're popular. Because, if you're somebody who's kind of to themselves and they don't really have a lot of attention on them, you're not going to get enough votes. You could actually be probably the best candidate you've ever seen. But if people don't know who you are, they're not going to vote for you. You also need to be able to be recognized by the media, and this means that the media needs to know who you are, that they actually consider you, an actual candidate who is running. It's a love-hate relationship with the media. The more attention that you get is a good thing, even if it's bad attention sometimes. You also need to have some sort of political experience. Typically, we've talked about this in the past, that the presidents who have run for office have had some sort of experience as a governor, senator, etc. However, with Donald Trump, he was not in the political sphere at all. Same thing with, for example, Dwight Eisenhower. He was a military general. So we have had a lot of people who have run and won the presidency without any political experience whatsoever. Now, we did talk about Barack Obama. He was a senator prior. Bernie Sanders was a senator. Hillary Clinton was also married to a president, and then she served on Barack Obama's cabinet. And I want to say she was a senator, but I don't think she was. I need to double check that. Also, you need to also have the possibility of winning the general election, which means that you have to appeal to a wide base of voters. So you have to make sure that you are campaigning. Now, this is where we get to the vice presidential nomination. We've kind of talked to this a little about when we got into the executive branch. We mentioned balancing the ticket, which means that you want to, there it is, good. You want to pick somebody who is going to balance you out. So if you are running for president You're trying to get as many different demographics of voters as possible. It's a very important strategy. There's a strategy behind all of this, okay? So in the example that we used for the executive branch, we talked about Barack Obama and Joe Biden. Barack Obama, who is an African-American male, who was kind of young, he didn't have a lot of experience in office at that point because he had only served as a senator. And he had not been a senator very long. Joe Biden, on the other hand, was an older white male who had actually served in the Senate for close to 30-something years at that point. So he had a lot of experience. So those are two things that you would consider. Obama was able to capture the African-American vote. He actually also captured the majority of the white vote. And you also have to consider, Hispanic vote, different demographics like that. Women, he actually captured a lot of the votes for women, okay? But when you pick a vice presidential candidate who run alongside you, again, you need to make sure that you're going to be able to balance yourself out. So whoever you can't get or whoever you feel like is not going to vote for you, you want to pick a vice president candidate who will appeal to those people, if that makes sense. So first thing that you want to look for is their political views. Ideology just means their views. Okay, so do they agree with the same thing that you agree with? Are they a little bit different? If this picture, if you remember this, you probably don't, but this is McCain and Palin. So John McCain actually ran for president, I want to say against Obama. Maybe it was the first term. Yeah, I think it was his first term in office. John McCain ran for president against Obama. He had also picked Sarah Palin, who was the governor of Alaska at that point, to be his vice president. So that was automatically the woman, okay? So she appealed to women across the country. John McCain, who was a war veteran, who had actually been a prisoner of war and a senator, so he appealed to the older generation. And so you kind of had a good balance there. You also want to make sure, again, with gender. It also matters who you pick as far as they're a male or a female. Who are you trying to appeal to? So with the 2020 election, Joe Biden has he has selected Kamala Harris, who's going to be his vice presidential candidate. She is a female. She's also African American, so that is kind of their strategy there. They're trying to get different people to vote. You also want to consider the region that they're from. If you're from the Northeast or if you're from the Midwest, you want to make sure that you're trying to appeal to those people who are from a different area than you, okay? Your age. Age is also very important. Joe Biden is very old. Donald Trump is actually a lot older, but Mike Pence, his vice president, is a little bit younger. He's probably in his, I think, late 50s, maybe early 60s. Donald Trump is in his mid 70s. Biden, I think he's close to 80 at this point. But he's also got Kamala Harris, who is a little bit younger. She's probably in her late 50s, maybe early 60s. And she's, able to, I guess, kind of get on board with some of the younger people, maybe. I'm not sure. And again, you also need to appeal to different demographics. So we've kind of covered all the bases here. First steps of the election process. Everyone who wants to run for president must announce their intent to run for their party. Usually 15 to 20 people announce per party. If you remember, even Kanye West said that he wanted to run for president, which, it didn't really work out. The party must then decide which one person they want to represent them in the general election. So that is what we were talking about. We said it starts out big, ends up with one person. So the Democrats, they started out with 7, they end up with 1. In order to decide, each party holds caucuses and primary elections. During these caucuses and primary elections, candidates compete in inter-party debates, where they will then debate each other. They also campaign and they start advertising. And they also must fundraise because, again, it's very expensive and they have to make sure they can get enough money to actually successfully win the election. So primary and caucuses, I'm not going to show you the video, I explained that already. They are elections held to determine each party's nominee, both presidential and congressional races. So the same thing happens for president. They also hold primaries and caucuses for congressional races as well. So you also saw that if you paid attention to, for example, the Senate election with Doug Jones. Who else? Roy Moore. We recently have the person who was going to run up against Doug Jones in this next election. So we had the Republican primaries for the state of Alabama, which was Tommy Tuberville And man, I forgot. Oh, I think oh, I'm having a brain freeze. Jeff Sessions, he also ran again for his previous position. Anyway, so these are caucuses and primaries, and that is what they are trying to do. They're narrowing down from a group of maybe like 5 to 7 down to one person that's actually going to be on the ballot. They typically run January to February to June of the election year, and then sometime in June or the end of June, even going into July, that is when the political party will name the person that's going to represent them on the ballot during the actual election. So, I know this is a lot, guys. I'm sorry. You need to understand this. There are 2 major types of primaries. You have an open and a closed. The open primary means that a voter may choose to participate in whichever primary they choose, regardless of their registered party preference. So if you're a Democrat or if you're a Republican, you can participate in both. Now, in order to participate in a closed primary, that means that the voter must be registered with a specific party in order to vote in their primary. And that is what you saw during the 2019 election year, or we'll say the primaries. The people who were casting ballots for, let me show you, the people who were casting ballots for these people were registered Democrats, and these were closed primaries. And that is how these people, or that is how we gauged whether or not the candidates were successful. It also showed different, like Warren, for example, she was not polling well in certain places. Bloomberg, he dropped out a little bit later too. Who else? Tulsi Gabbard, I can't remember how far she got. But eventually, this is what I'm talking about. So through the closed primary system, this is how they decide on who's actually going to represent them in the election. Okay, as the election play out, unsuccessful candidates will drop out. You also know there's a day known as Super Tuesday. That is the day when the greatest number of states hold their caucuses and primaries. It's typically sometime in March. All right, for example, this is the 2016 primaries. So we have some of these people I recognize, some of the people I kind of forgotten, honestly. I'm sorry. We have Ted Cruz here. We have Ben Carson. This is a Bush. And we have Donald Trump. I forget who these 2 gentlemen are. After all of the Republican candidates above competed in the primaries and caucuses, Donald Trump ultimately won and served as the Republican nominee. Again, I said this was 2016 because in the 2020 elections, the Republicans have selected Donald Trump because he is the incumbent. He is the sitting president. They have selected him to run for office as the Republican candidate. So we get into national party conventions. After the primaries, each party will officially nominate their candidate at the National Party Convention. Typically, this happens the summer before the general election. However, because of COVID, they weren't able to really do this up as big as they wanted to. Also, at the party convention, this is when they actually determine their party platform. So let me pause here and I will show you an example. All right, so this is going to be 2 examples. We're going to look at the Democratic Party platform versus the Republican Party platform just briefly. You can go look this up yourself. I will try to attach it into the lecture video section. That way you can read about it if you want to. But parties do not have to really alter their platforms every year. Most of them do, depending on, kind of what the current demands are from the people. So the 2020 platform for the Democrats, these are just their topics here. I'm not going to go into it. You can look this up. This is a whole PDF. It's like 90 something pages and it goes into a lot of detail. Same thing with the Republicans. They've kept the party platform from 2016 because, considering you have the same president, he's probably going to stick to a lot of the things, or he is going to stick to a lot of the things that he was attempting to do in 2016, and he's going to carry that over into his second term. So the Democrats, however, they say they want to protect Americans recovering from the COVID pandemic, build a stronger, fairer economy, achieve universal, affordable, quality health care, protect communities and buildings trust by reforming our criminal justice system, which is kind of funny because you've got Kamala Harris. That's just my opinion. Healing the soul of America, combating the climate crisis and pursuing environmental justice, restoring and strengthening our democracy, creating a 21st century immigration system, providing a world-class education in every zip code, and renewing American leadership. So you can click on some of these things. If you do, see it'll go to a little section here. And again, it's a lot to read, but I do recommend that you read about it because, again, your vote matters, and I don't want you to just throw it away. Again, with the Republicans, they probably have they have their preamble. They have their leaders of the Republican Party. Okay, good. They have their table of contents. Okay, so these are their platforms. They want to restore the American dream. They want a rebirth of constitutional government. They also want, it says, America's natural resources, agriculture, energy, and the environment. They also have a platform about government reform. They have Great American Families, Education, Healthcare, and Criminal Justice. And they also have American Resurgent. So those are just examples. And then you can scroll down. And again, it talks about what each section stands for. So rebuilding the American dream for the Republicans, that means rebuilding the economy and creating jobs. They also, it says fair and simple taxes for growth. So they actually want to lower taxes. They also want America to be competitive globally. Winning trade policy. Freeing financial markets, and these are just all in that same section. Responsible home ownership and rental opportunities, America on the move. So again, there's all these different things that you can read about. I highly, highly encourage you to look into this stuff because it's very important that you know how to find it. Okay, so again, like I said, we talked about the party's platform. Then it says the presidential and vice presidential nominees are officially announced. Speeches are given by party leaders and kicks off the campaign leading to Election Day. Now, this is typically in the past when there was no COVID. These conventions kind of looked like concerts in a way. All of these people sitting here are registered Republicans or Democrats. You see the big stages here. They even had musical guests. Okay, they also had different speakers who came. Depending on what the platform was. So, sometimes the Republicans would bring military veterans and different, families to come and speak. And so this is just, kind of an example of what it was. It will go back to that, I'm sure, when the pandemic is over. But campaign time. After the conventions come the final campaign push to Election Day. Candidates will then visit numerous states, particularly swing states. And what you need to know about swing states is that means that they never really vote one way or the other. Okay, for example, for the last maybe 20 to 25 years, maybe, probably more than that, maybe like 40 years. For the past maybe 40 years, Alabama has known to be almost straight Republican as far as their votes. So that means that if you're a Republican candidate, you're running for office, you kind of already know that you're going to get that state guaranteed to you. Like it's not going to be up in the air. Now, Ohio, for example, they could go either way. They also have a reasonable amount of electoral college votes that you're trying to win. So you definitely want to make sure that you campaign in the swing states because, again, it could go either way. The strategy. Difference between primary and general election campaigns is your target audience. In primaries, the candidates appeal to the party activists. However, in the general election, you're trying to appeal to everybody because maybe you could even get people who typically are a Democrat to vote Republican, or if you could get a Republican to vote Democrat, it really could be up in the air. As long as you're making sure that you're campaigning across the country and that people are seeing you, that they like your ideas, that they feel that you're active. A lot of it, comes down to if they actually support your policies or not. But you could actually, have people switch over to different parties based on the candidate. So we'll talk about that. We'll show these videos, like I said, in class. Modern day campaigns. A lot of money here. Campaign fundraising now numbers in the billions. In 2000, your average was about $3 billion. In 2016, it's over $6.5 billion, more than double in 16 years. It means that you have to have incredible financial resources that are needed to compete because you have higher fundraising pressures. And a lot of the reasons that some of these people dropped out of the Democratic campaign was because they just simply ran out of money. Social media also plays a huge role in campaigning and fundraising. The free method to reach voters. It also allows for more misinformation and selective attention. So one of the things that I was going to show you, let me pause here. All right, so we talked about the negatives of social media when it comes to elections. This is something that is actually happening right now that you need to be aware of. So Mark Zuckerberg, who is the head of Facebook, says that he will not allow Trump to declare victory before the results are in. And you might say, well, why is that? Or what does that matter? You know, a lot of people don't particularly like Trump. That's not the point here. The point is that this is now starting to officially mess with election results. It's officially messing with the public. Okay. So Facebook, I don't know if you've noticed, especially with Twitter, they have now added different little things to their people's posts that fact check it, right? A lot of these posts that people are making that get fact checked are actually true because it's all about the political narrative, the agenda that these big tech companies are trying to put out there for you as the viewers to see. So if it goes against what they agree with, they're going to try to say not true, but it could be true. Okay. For the people who actually do the fact checking, a lot of those are very one-sided, which means they tend to be more liberal ideology. So you're kind of hiding a whole section of content from the masses. It's like you're trying to hide things. So a lot of it is propaganda. Now, what you need to know about this, if you know with the pandemic that's happening, the big push right now is mail-in ballots. Well, that has not actually, been expressed. That's not for sure yet that they're really going to push that. There's been a lot of misinformation that's being spread about this right now. But with the mail-in ballots, that means that you might not have, think about how slow the mail goes sometimes. So if you, mail in your ballot, you might not get that thing received for maybe 2 weeks, even after you mail it. It depends on where you're mailing it from. So Mark Zuckerberg has declared that he will not allow Trump, specifically Trump, he will not allow him to announce that he has won the election until the ballot or until the results are officially in. Okay. So how is that? That's unfair, right? Why is he saying that just for Trump? Why is he not saying that for Biden? It doesn't matter who you believe, who you are, voting for. Fairness is very important when you're holding an election. It's been this way for years. That was what we were founded on, is fair elections. So for you to single out one specific person or one specific candidate is wrong. It says that Trump has repeatedly said voting by mail would lead to election fraud. And honestly, I agree with that, because think about how easy it is to, send in something that's kind of fake. I'll have to show you a little bit later all the different ballots that have been, turned up in different states. They have actually tried mail-in ballots throughout the pandemic for different other elections, not presidential elections, and they have not been successful. So this is something we'll look into a little bit later, but I want you to kind of get an idea and be aware of this, okay? So again, it shows how social media uses selective attention. Another thing that will happen is that when you're on your Facebook page, social media or Facebook will tailor the advertisements, they tailor the messages, the posts that you see based on your viewpoints, which means that you only see people who think like you. That's not good for political discourse or civil discourse. In order for us to get, to grow as a country, you need to also engage with others who disagree with you. And that's okay. You need to make sure you understand what they think. And even if it's different from what you believe, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. Okay? The country was founded on the fact that you have freedom of speech, that you have freedom of ideas, and that you're able to express yourself freely. So this is where we're getting into now the dangers of social media when it comes to elections. Presidential debates. So you're going to actually look at this as one of your assignments. The two major parties then will participate in several national debates, usually 3 for presidential candidates and 1 for the vice presidential candidates. The key part of elections since 1960, the very first televised debate, which you're going to look at, was between Kennedy and Nixon. And I have talked about it in that activity. We'll go into a little more further in depth when we watch it in class. So then we have General Election Day. The general election always takes place on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November on even-numbered years. So this might be a test question for you that you need to know. When did the elections take place? Voting takes place at your local polling place, and this is one of the things for you to register to vote. You need to figure out where your polling place is, because that doesn't mean you can go anywhere to cast a ballot. You are required to go to a specific station or specific area that you are registered at. The general election day votes make up the national popular vote, because we said that the popular vote there's two ways of selecting the president. So the popular vote and then also the electoral college, which we've talked about in this first section that you should have watched prior to this. Typically the winner is announced that night, but the official electoral college vote does not take place until December, or that's when the ballots are actually due. How do Americans vote? Americans' voting behavior tends to fall into 4 different categories. Some of you, this might be you, okay? Some people, when they cast their ballot, they vote based on what is in their best interest. Who will support the issues most important to me? For some of you, depending on how the economy is going, or how healthcare is going, or just the general things that are up in the news every day, you might look at those things and say, well, how does that affect me? Am I going to pick somebody who's going to do something about this? Okay, sure. You also have retrospective voting, which means that you vote based on how a candidate or party has performed in the recent or past, should they be reelected. Then you have prospective voting, voting based on how you think a candidate or party will perform in the future. And then you have party line voting, where voting clearly along party lines for all offices. And so that means when you go and cast a ballot, there are 2 boxes at the very top. So you can either vote strictly Republican or strictly Democrat. And that means that every single person that's running for office, whether it's a senator for your state, whether it's a representative, House of Representatives member for your state, you are just strictly voting Republican or Democrat. And so it saves time, but I don't believe that just one person is good for the office just because of their one party, if that makes sense. Certain people are good for offices. It just depends on what your beliefs are. This is what I was talking about with the incumbency advantage. The incumbent, this is a definition you need to know for your test. The incumbent is a current office holder. So, in the 2020 election, Donald Trump is the incumbent. In presidential elections, typically the incumbent runs unopposed in the primaries, and so that's what I was saying. Historically, if you're the incumbent, they're not going to put anybody up against you. I want to say maybe in the Teddy Roosevelt election, he might have been. That's right, he did run against, oh gosh, was it McKinley? I can't remember. Anyway, that was the election that was actually different. He had created his own political party, the Bull Moose Party, to try to run against the Republicans because he had kind of split away from them. Incumbency is an advantage in both presidential and congressional elections, but especially in congressional elections. They have the highest rate of re-election. They also have name recognition and campaign experience. So, if you say to yourself, how are these people who are in senators or even House of Representatives members, how are they in office for 30 years? How are they in office for 40 years? How do they make their entire living just from being in Congress? For example, Bernie Sanders never really held a real job. Neither did Joe Biden. They never really held a real job outside of Congress. So it wasn't like they were some sort of businessman or anything crazy. They really have made their money through Congress. I want to say the same is true of Nancy Pelosi. So these are what we call career politicians. Okay, so that means their entire career has been made through Congress, and that is because they were an incumbent. It is a lot easier for the incumbent to run for re-election than somebody new, because you now have to have a lot of money. There's all different things that we'll go into, but really that's kind of my AP class that we talk about that in. But there's all kinds of different factors that play into the incumbency advantage, what we call it. So the three that we'll focus on here, again, we said the high rate of reelection. They also have name recognition and campaign experience. A lot of people don't pay attention to politics, if you figured out already. So that means that even if they don't know who somebody is or what they've done in their career, if they recognize their name, they'll say, okay, I'll vote for them because I know who they are. And they may never heard of the new person. Okay, that's what we call recognition, name recognition. They also have an easier time raising money. They have more government resources at their disposal. And so that is why they are more likely to be reelected. Now, we talked about the Electoral College briefly. I'm sorry, not briefly. We talked about it in our last section. When Americans vote in November, they are actually voting for a group of electors who will make up the Electoral College. These electors cast official votes in December to decide the election. The people who are the electors are not members of Congress, nor of the government. They are actual random citizens. Well, not random, but they are actual citizens, okay? Each state is designated a certain number of electors based on the size and how many senators and representatives they have. So, for example, if you look at this picture here, Alabama, right here with number 9, we currently, and I say that because with the census results, we could lose some representatives, but currently we have 7 members of the House of Representatives and we have 2 senators. So that means that our magic number for the Electoral College is 9. California, on the other hand, has 53 House of Representatives members, and they have 2 senators equaling 55 total Electoral College votes. We said that Ohio, the swing state here, they have 18 total, all right? So that means that they have 16 House of Representatives members and 2 senators. Notice the bigger states, those are the ones that a lot of people will campaign in. So you've got Texas, you've got Florida, you've got Ohio, Illinois, you've got Pennsylvania, New York. These are Georgia even. These are where the candidates will typically try to go and campaign. Notice that they don't go to the little states very often. And that has a lot to do with the fact that, again, they're little states. Now, if we did not have the Electoral College, the only states that would matter would be the ones with high populations. And that means that we wouldn't get a fair shot. Okay? Remember we said that the city of Los Angeles has, 22 million people living in it? The only 2 cities, or the only 2 areas that would even matter if we didn't have the Electoral College would be Los Angeles and New York. And that would be it. Everybody else would be forgotten about. So the Electoral College is very important. But when you watch this on television, in order for somebody to win the presidency, they have to have 270 votes to win. There are 538 electors total on this map here. Now we get to inauguration. The new president is inaugurated into office on January 20th. From November to January, the winner of the election is considered the president-elect. So that means they have not officially been sworn in yet. So until they are sworn in, then they are the new president. So during that time, again, we said they are the president-elect. I may have a test question about that, so just be aware of what the president-elect is. So this is the process recap. I'm not going to go over this because, frankly, I'm out of breath, and we've really beaten this dead horse now. So I think that if you need to take a screenshot of this, make sure you write this down. It should be in your notes. Okay, so we're going to move on, and I think this is it. No, we're not. Okay, we're not going to do this just yet because, again, this is something that we do in my regular classes, like in person. So we're not going to do that activity. So we'll stop here.